Mendami seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, "If the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again." Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies? One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a Democratic Socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won. In districts, Trump also won. All moderates.
Bill Maher just went scorched earth on the Democratic Socialists, and what he said is impossible to ignore. The outspoken HBO host didn't sugarcoat it. He accused the Democratic Socialist faction of dragging the Democratic Party toward dangerous ideological territory, pushing an agenda he believes could fundamentally transform America in ways most voters never signed up for. The critique was fierce, it was cutting, and it landed like a sledgehammer. If you want to understand what's really fracturing the Democratic Party right now, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and let's get into it.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're Democratic Socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Maher didn't ease into it. He went straight for Bernie Sanders, one of the loudest, most recognizable faces of democratic socialism in America. Sanders has spent decades championing a single-payer healthcare system, selling it as the silver bullet for everything wrong with American medicine. But Maher didn't just push back with theory. He pointed to an actual real-world test case. Vermont. Deep blue, progressive Vermont, the kind of state where an idea like this should have had every advantage to succeed. And yet it collapsed. It became too expensive, too complicated, and ultimately too unsustainable to survive. To Maher, that wasn't just a local policy failure. That was a warning shot. He argued that democratic socialism has a seductive quality. It sounds compassionate, it sounds fair, it wraps itself in the language of justice and universal care. But when it collides with economic reality, the math stops working. Ideas that win standing ovations in speeches have a habit of quietly falling apart when someone has to actually pay for them. And that gap between what sounds good and what actually functions is, in Maher's view, the fatal flaw running through the entire movement.
And this is, again, why people sometimes, I think, question some of what you're saying. This is a survey, student loan forgiveness recipients. 73% of applicants say they are likely to spend their extra money on non-essential, including vacations, smartphone, drugs, and alcohol. They admitted that to the pollster.
Who is this pollster?
NBC News. 52% they are very likely to buy new clothing. 46% they would use the money for vacation and eat out at restaurants. This is why people have a thing about, I would never call it free money, like I said.
Here's where it gets even more interesting. Maher makes a pointed observation about how Bernie Sanders handles inconvenient data. When faced with hard facts that challenge his worldview, Sanders' instinct, Maher notes, is often to question the source. Now, and Maher acknowledges this, demanding sources isn't inherently wrong. That's just good debate practice. But his argument cuts deeper than that. He's saying these sources aren't coming from some shadowy think tank. They're reflecting what ordinary Americans are already telling pollsters, telling candidates, telling anyone who will listen. Given a real choice, a significant portion of the country still gravitates toward capitalism over socialism. Why? Because voters value flexibility. They value incentive. They value the feeling that what they build, they own. Maher's argument here is essentially about human nature. When you hand people resources without a clear structure tied to productivity, you sometimes get short-term thinking instead of long-term growth. That's not a partisan talking point, that's a behavioral pattern. And it's precisely why, despite years of progressive momentum, the broader electorate remains skeptical of fully embracing government-managed systems. Theory is clean. Human nature is messy.
I know the kids think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes. Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chávez's Socialism for the 21st Century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century or any century, a mess. It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest.
Now Maher pivots, and this is where the critique gets sharper. He's no longer just talking about Vermont or polling data. He's talking about history. His argument is blunt: socialism isn't some untested idea waiting for its moment. It's been tried. Repeatedly. And the track record deserves a serious look. He points to Venezuela, once one of the wealthiest nations in Latin America, sitting on the largest oil reserves in the world. State control tightened, economic mismanagement set in, and what followed was hyperinflation so severe it gutted the middle class virtually overnight. Then there's Cuba. Decades of state-dominated economic policy have produced persistent shortages, weak growth, and a system that has required extraordinary external support just to function. And North Korea represents the extreme end of the spectrum, one of the most tightly controlled economies on the planet, where personal economic freedom is essentially non-existent. Maher's point isn't that America is one policy away from Pyongyang, but he is saying there's a pattern here that responsible policymakers cannot simply wave away. When ideology overrides economic reality, the people who pay the price aren't the politicians making the speeches. It's everyone else.
I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more.
But here's where Maher adds some nuance, and it matters. He's not arguing that America should dismantle every social program and leave people to fend for themselves. He openly acknowledges that the U.S. has already built a mixed system, capitalism as the engine, with targeted social safety nets designed to catch people before they fall through the floor. That balance, in his view, is actually working. The danger, he argues, is in tipping too far. Push aggressively toward full democratic socialism and you risk undermining the very forces that make the American economy move: innovation, individual ambition, the drive to build something. Maher paints a stark picture of what that overcorrection could look like in practice: looser border enforcement creating pressure points on national security, heavier state control over critical resources, and a creeping erosion of individual choice. He goes as far as invoking the image of long lines in the scorching heat, people waiting for bread, for milk, for basic essentials, as a visceral reminder of what happens when supply chains get subordinated to ideology. It sounds extreme, but he's making a deliberate point: this isn't ancient history. This is happening in countries right now, and the distance between there and here isn't as wide as some assume.
It's either defund the police or military in the streets. Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods.
Maher gets personal here, and it's one of his most direct moments in the entire critique. He's not anti-compassion. He's not arguing that struggling Americans should be ignored. What he's rejecting is the specific mechanic of heavy redistribution as the solution. His case for capitalism is rooted in something simpler and more human than ideology: the belief that if you work hard, take risks, and build something, the reward should actually reach you. That connection between effort and outcome, that's what drives ambition. That's what keeps the engine running. And when that connection gets severed, when the system leans so hard on redistribution that high performers start to feel like they're simply subsidizing everyone else, resentment builds. Motivation fades. Maher's argument is that this isn't just an economic problem, it's a morale problem. Pouring everyone's labor into a collective pool without clear limits doesn't produce more fairness. It produces stagnation. And in his blunt assessment, that's not compassion. That's a slow economic death dressed up in progressive language.
Governor-elect Spanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal! You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in 2025. Yeah, no one wants to do that.
Then comes the political warning, and Maher doesn't soften it. He's looking ahead to 2028 and what he sees concerns him. If the Democratic Party fails to create meaningful distance from its hardline Democratic Socialist wing, he argues they could be walking straight into an electoral disaster. Voters, especially those in the middle, the independents, the people who actually decide elections, are growing increasingly frustrated with policies that feel disconnected from their daily lives. Maher's point is structural. Elections aren't won at the ideological extremes. They're won in the center. And if the party becomes synonymous in the public mind with regulations that complicate life, proposals that strain credibility, and a worldview that feels more at home in a faculty lounge than a diner in Ohio, the consequences at the ballot box will be real and severe. His message to Democratic leadership is direct. The warning signs are already there. Misread the room now, and 2028 won't just be a loss. It'll be the kind of loss that takes years to recover from.
This election is taking place when we have an administration in Washington which every day is moving us toward an authoritarian society.
This is America, New York City. Don't let them tell you any different. Don't let them tell you that we are the exception. We are the rule. And we set the bar for America. I'm talking to you, Donald Trump.
Let our words ring out so loud tonight that Andrew Cuomo can hear them in his $8,000 a month apartment. New York is not for sale.
The rally cries are already echoing through the streets. Voices like Zoran Mamdani, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders have become the defining faces of the Democratic Socialist movement within the party, each pushing an agenda that challenges where Democrats have traditionally stood. Mamdani in particular has built real momentum in New York City, running on bold progressive reforms, energizing a specific urban base, and turning that energy into electoral wins at the local level. And Maher acknowledges the win, but he raises a critical question that the party can't afford to ignore. Does a strategy that works in one of the bluest, most progressive cities in America actually translate to the rest of the country? Because political, economic, and cultural realities don't look the same in New York as they do in Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin. Treating a localized victory as a national mandate, Maher warns, is one of the most dangerous assumptions a political party can make. What energizes a Brooklyn voter may alienate a swing voter in the suburbs. And in an electoral map where margins are razor-thin, that miscalculation could cost everything.
Now, Mamdani seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, if the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies?
And this is where Maher frames the entire debate as a tale of two strategies, and the contrast couldn't be sharper. On one side, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia took a deliberately different path. She ran by openly distancing herself from Democratic Socialism, warning voters about its risks, and speaking a language that moderates and independents could actually hear. It worked. She won. On the other side, figures like Zoran Mamdani have found real success by leaning into progressive socialist policies, but in the very specific context of New York City, where the electorate is uniquely positioned to support that message. Both strategies have delivered wins. But here's the thing Maher wants Democrats to sit with: those wins happened in very different political environments. Spanberger's message to the DNC is pointed and direct: what works in one region is not automatically a national playbook. Going all in on democratic socialism risks alienating a massive swath of voters who are open to progressive ideas but not to ideological overreach. And Maher agrees. He believes that if you push the average American voter far enough in that direction, they push back.
At least the party has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a Democratic Socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won in districts Trump also won, all moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message: move to the center. Even the New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win.
When you strip everything away, Maher's argument comes down to one fundamental tension: idealism versus reality. He's not simply criticizing individual politicians or specific policy proposals. He's issuing a directional warning to an entire party. Taking aim at Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Zoran Mamdani, he's pointing to what he sees as a dangerous drift: ideas that generate excitement on social media and at rallies but struggle to hold up under the weight of real-world scrutiny. From the collapse of single-payer healthcare in Vermont to the economic devastation in Venezuela and Cuba, Maher sees a recurring pattern. And he doesn't think Democrats can afford to keep ignoring it. The contrast with Spanberger's moderate, pragmatic approach in Virginia makes the choice feel even starker. His conclusion is about as direct as it gets: push too far, too fast, and the party risks losing the very voters it needs to ever hold power again. Balance matters. Perception matters. And in American politics, losing touch with the middle isn't just a strategic error, it's a self-inflicted wound. That's the warning Maher is sounding. Whether the party chooses to hear it is another question entirely. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, hit that like button, subscribe for more political analysis, and let us know in the comments: is Maher right, or is he missing something?